This encounter took place several years ago, when I was around 26. I was on a road trip with a friend, and we were going through a remote part of the Australian outback. We were both science and zoology nerds, and had heard about an amazing dinosaur trail out this way, which is basically a grouping of areas that have had previous dinosaur bone discoveries. This one still had fossils, and even had an awesome dinosaur track with preserved footprints. We were staying about 3 hours outside of Winton for a couple days, and we're pretty keen to check out this trail, so we decided to do the 6-hour round trip in one day. We were pretty ambitious and stupid back then. We left at 9 a.m. the next morning, car packed with lunch, several liters of water, and my trusty GPS. It was a long drive, and we were only about halfway through when my air conditioner shit the bed. If you've been to Australia in the summer, you would know how brutally hot it can get. To make matters worse, my GPS stopped working since the software didn't recognize the area we were in. Luckily, I had an old map in my back seat, but it's pretty tough to revert back to map reading when you're used to a computer screen telling you where to go. We finally made it to the trail. We spent a few hours there before deciding to make the trip back. It was starting to get late in the afternoon, and we didn't want to be driving in the dark. As we were leaving, this gnarly-looking old man stopped to ask us where we were from and where we were heading. He was wearing khaki and camouflage gear, so he looked like an employee of the Dinosaur Trail company. He gave me the stink eye when I was giving him vague answers to his questions, so my friend ended up telling him the name of the town we were staying in. This guy took a real liking to my friend, and he laughed when we told him about our journey in. Apparently, we had taken the long route, and there was a shortcut to get back that would shave about an hour off of our trip. We gladly wrote down the directions before heading out, thinking about how lucky we were to have met this guy with great directions home. I definitely got a creepy vibe from him, but I was way too excited to get home early to think too much of it. The directions he gave us sent us winding along several roads in an area I had never seen before, and eventually brought us to this narrow dirt road. We were supposed to reach an intersection after about half an hour, take a right, and continue on that road until we got to the main highway. But after about an hour and a half on this dirt trail, we still didn't find any intersections. I was worried we had missed the turn, but my friend was confident that we'd get there eventually. It was getting later in the day, and our tank was only a quarter full. There weren't any houses, cars, or other roads in sight. There weren't even any trees around, only this dirt road and desolate, dry bushland and shrubs as far as you could see. Finally, I stopped the car and told my friend to get the binoculars out of the back to take a look around. He could just make out a structure in the distance that looked kind of like a house, so we decided to head in that direction. We figured if it was a house, maybe the people there would be nice enough to give us some gas to top us up, and maybe some better directions. As we got closer, though, it became apparent that it wasn't a house at all. We pulled up out front and saw that it was an old caravan that had been burned to a shell from the inside out. It still had 3 blackened partial walls up though, so we couldn't see all the way in. However, it did look like someone had been there recently. There were animal bones strung up all over the place, and a cow skull at the entrance. Some of the bones even had grass or horsehair woven into them, and they were arranged like decorations. As we were looking around, we spotted a hand-painted sign staked into the ground that read, Moonlight Motel. All of my alarm bells were ringing at this point, so I nudged my friend to indicate that we should get the fuck out of there, but he was distracted by something in the distance. It was another car, coming in the direction we had just come from. It must have only been about 10 minutes or so behind us the entire time we were driving, but I hadn't spotted it once. It was kicking up a ton of dust, so we knew it was coming towards us fast. Suddenly, we both heard this creepy scratching sound coming from the burned-out caravan, as if someone was scratching at the wall from the inside. Moving in a little closer to see what it was, I saw a person peeking out at us from a hole in the damaged wall. and a childlike voice, which was obviously a grown man imitating a little girl, the person giggled and said, "Are you here to play with me?" Without hesitation, my friend and I booked it out of there towards our car. Just as I was about to back into the road, the other car pulled up behind us with their high beams on. They were completely in my way, so I had no choice but to pull forward and turn around. As we were quickly making our turn, the other driver started blaring his horn. I sped off in the direction we had come from, and luckily we didn't see the other car follow. It was dusk by then, and the country roads out here were dangerous at this time of night. We finally felt a bit better when we navigated our way back to the Dinosaur Trail, and even had started joking about what had just happened. I pulled into the parking lot and went up to the desk area. Luckily, one of the tour guides was still at the booth and listened as I explained how we had gotten lost on our way into town. She was kind enough to give us gas for the ride back. I couldn't help but bring up the man we had ran into earlier that day, so I mentioned to her that her coworker was a real jerk for giving us those weird directions. She gave me a weird look and asked me to describe the guy I was talking about. As I told her what he looked like, she shook her head and said, "That man doesn't work here. I saw him talking with the tourists today, and my boss asked him to leave. He kept trying to get details about where people were staying, and he was telling them that he had vacancies at his place so they could stay there instead. I think he called it the Moonlight Motel." When I was a kid, my family would pack up our car and drive to Mexico every summer and almost every New Year. We always had a great time and never encountered any issues, until a trip we went on when I was about 8 years old. The trip started off just like all of our trips before. We left our home in North Texas around 6 p.m. in order to get to our destination by the next morning. Around 2 a.m., we crossed into Mexico, and that's when things got weird. It was almost pitch black outside. The only visible shapes were dotted stars in the sky and the eerie silhouettes of cacti on the side of the road. We had been in Mexico for about an hour and still had a few more to go. I could never fully fall asleep in the car, so I remember snoozing occasionally, but still being conscious of our surroundings. When my mom suddenly spoke my dad's name, I was awake enough to hear her. "Miguel, that car behind us, it's been with us since we left Laredo." My dad peeked at the car, but simply reassured her that lots of cars used the road we were on, and the driver was probably heading to one of the cities on the way. To be fair, it wasn't all that uncommon to see the same car behind you for miles when you're on the only stretch of freeway in the desert. Despite my dad's response, though, my mom kept a wary eye on the car behind us. My siblings and I woke up while my parents were talking, so we entertained ourselves for a while by watching the car through the gaps in our luggage in the back. After a while, my mom spoke up again to warn my dad that he was getting closer. We turned and watched as the car inched closer and closer to ours. "He's too close, Miguel." She was right. The car was practically pressed up against ours, and on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, it was scary. There wasn't much we could do though, so my dad just kept driving without slowing down or stopping. The next 30 minutes were tense. The car would ease off occasionally, just to speed right back up and get close behind us again. Finally, my mom spotted a police car ahead on the side of the road and shouted for my dad to pull over. The car kept driving past us as we slowed down in front of the cop. When the policeman came over to our car, my mom told him everything that had happened. Luckily, he took her seriously and told us how often people get their cars stolen on this highway. He offered to drive behind us for a while, and we accepted. We felt relieved for a little bit with the police cruiser behind us, until about 10 minutes into our drive. That's when we spotted it. There, on the side of the road, was the car pulled over, waiting for us. This happened while I was on a cross-country road trip with a colleague. We were on a desolate highway in West Texas, and we only saw a truck stop or gas station every 100 miles or so. The exits weren't really towns, just places to fill up your gas tank and continue on your way. It was pretty late at night, and my coworker had been driving for hours. I can usually handle driving for about 8 hours before I'm tired out, but she could only manage 4 or 5 before it was my turn again. We were also getting low on gas, only about a quarter tank, so we started looking out for gas stations. We were having this corny conversation about fate and destiny as she took the next exit. Those kinds of conversations always get me worked up, so I was trying to change the subject. We pulled up into a dingy gas station, and I grabbed my coffee mug to fill up for my turn behind the wheel. There was a trailer out back that I assume the owners of the station lived in, and one other car parked in front of the doors. We got out, still continuing our conversation from earlier, and each of us grabbed onto a handle on the double doors to the station. The doors were locked. I looked around to see if there was a closed sign up, but instead just found a few things that seemed suspicious. The coffee maker inside was halfway through brewing a fresh pot of coffee. The monitors for the security cameras were all showing static, and there was something splashed on the back door of the store. Suddenly, I realized I was looking at a huge streak of blood with handprints in it. Every hair on my neck stood up. My friend must not have noticed what I saw because she just started shaking the door, yelling that we needed to get gas. I had already turned around and started walking away from the doors. I took a closer look at the other car in the lot on our way by. It had no plates. It was dingy and covered in dents, and there was an empty gun rack in it, visible through the windows. I started running to the car, dragging my friend with me. She seemed to take forever opening the car door to get in, complaining about how we still needed gas the whole time. I frantically told her about the blood I had seen as we jumped in the car and started to pull away. As we were backing up, I could see through the gas station windows that the bloody back door was opening. Thankfully, we pulled away and started back on the road before anyone came out and saw us. I was freaking out for the first 20 miles back on the highway. I kept trying to call the police, but I didn't have a signal for miles until we reached another truck stop. The cops thanked me for letting them know, but I never heard anything more about it. To this day, I still think about what might have happened if I hadn't hurried my friend back to the car so quickly. Despite all my research, I never did figure out exactly what happened there that night.